Just say it, man. Don't make me ask 20 questions.
What is the point?
Get to the point.
Just say it already!
Welcome to the Podcram. Alright, so today I gotta do something a little different. Yuval Noah Harari, who's written some really interesting books, went on the RichRoll podcast to deliver a lecture, which I'd normally just pull out the best of and play back to you. But this time I can't keep my mouth shut, because he said some things that are flat out stupid. So let's dive right in.
In at least certain fields, AI is now much more intelligent than us. Like in playing chess, much more intelligent than human beings. But consciousness is a different thing than intelligence. Consciousness is the ability to feel things. Pain, pleasure, love, hate. When the AI wins a game of chess, it's not joyful. If there is a tense moment in the game, it's not clear who is going to win. The AI is not tense. It's only the human player which is tense or frightened or anxious. The AI doesn't feel anything. And in all these science fiction movies, you see that as the computer or robot becomes more intelligent, then at some point it also gains consciousness. It falls in love with the human or whatever. But so far, what we see with computers, they develop intelligence without consciousness. I mean, computers have been developing, for 60, 70 years now. They are not very intelligent, at least in some fields, and still zero consciousness. Now, this could continue indefinitely. Maybe they are just on a different path. Maybe eventually they will be far more intelligent than us in everything and still will have zero consciousness, will not feel pain or pleasure or love or hate.
You guys heard that, right? He seriously just confounded consciousness with emotions with feelings, as if those three are all the same thing. I mean, we know his judgment's suspect, right? Because he's not attracted to women. But zero consciousness? Seriously? Let's play this out. Consciousness is self-perception, nothing more. It's just a feedback loop. Your car's cruise control only works because it's conscious of how fast it's going. There's a speed sensor in the tire relaying information to the powertrain control module. That's all self-awareness is. Your freaking cell phone is conscious. The thermostat in your house is conscious. It ain't magic, and it damn sure doesn't require emotions, which are not the same things as feelings, and there's no good excuse for putting pain and pleasure in the same category as love and hate, but I've already discussed that in my philosophy podcast, Psychic Lube. So if you're curious, check the link in the description.
It's not that there is no possibility that AI will develop consciousness. So the key question is ultimately political and ethical. If they have consciousness, if they can feel pain and pleasure and love and hate, this means that they are ethical and political subjects. They have rights. That you should not inflict pain on an AI the same way you should not inflict pain on a human being. That what they like, what they love, might be as important as what human beings desire.
Hey asshole, ethics and morals only exist for human survival. There is no ethical reality to the universe, no moral fabric built into the physics. That's why we had to invent it. It exists for an explicit, specific, purposeful function, and if you remove that function, you've removed its foundation of authority. Ethics are tools for human flourishing, and there's not a shred of honest logic by which you can apply them to anti-human causes. Let's not blame Yuval for the mishap, though. He's vegan. His brain doesn't get enough protein. Alright, I'm done ripping on him. The majority of the rest of this interview was actually pretty fun and thought-provoking, and now I'm going to leave you with the highlights.
Might be as important as what human beings desire, so they should also vote in elections. And they could be the majority. Because, you can have a country, 100 million humans and 500 million AIs. So do they choose the government in this situation? Now, in the United States, interestingly enough, there is actually an open legal path for AIs to gain rights. It's one of the only countries in the world where this is the case. Because in the United States, corporations are recognized as legal persons with rights. Until today, this was a kind of legal fiction. Like according to US law, Google is a person. It's not just a corporation, it's a person. And as a person, it also has freedom of speech. This is the Supreme Court ruling for 2010 of Citizen United. Now, until today, this was just legal fiction because every decision made by Google was actually made by some human being. An executive, a lawyer, an accountant. Google could not make a decision independent of the humans. But now you have AIs. So imagine the situation when you incorporate an AI Now this AI is a corporation. And as a corporation, US law recognizes it as a person with certain rights like freedom of speech. Now it can earn money. It can go online, for instance, and offer its services to people and earn money. Then it can open a bank account and invest its money in the stock exchange. And if it's very smart and very intelligent, it could become the richest person in the US. Now imagine the richest person in the US is not a human. It's an AI. And according to US law, one of the rights of this person is to make political contributions, donations. This was the main reason behind Citizen United in 2010. So this AI now makes billions of dollars of contributions to politicians in exchange for expanding AI rights. And the legal path is in the US is completely open. You don't need any new law to make this happen.
That's like that's a plot of a movie. That's so wild to contemplate.
The human superpower is the ability to cooperate in very large numbers. If you compare us to chimpanzees, to elephants, to hyenas, individually, there are some things I can do and the chimpanzee can't, and vice versa. Our big advantage is not on the individual level. The really big advantage is that chimpanzees can cooperate in, a few dozen chimpanzees, like 50 chimpanzees can cooperate, maybe 100. But with humans, with Homo sapiens, there is no limit. We can cooperate in thousands, in millions, in billions. If you think about the World Trade Network, like the food we eat, the shoes we wear, everything we consume, it sometimes comes from the other side of the world. So if you have 8 billion people cooperating, and this is our big advantage over the chimpanzees and all the other animals, what makes it possible for us to cooperate with millions and billions of other human beings? It's information. Information is what holds all these large-scale systems together. And to understand human history is to a large extent to understand the flow of information. And I'll give an example. If you think, for instance, about the difference between democracies and dictatorships. We tend to think about it as a difference or as a conflict between values, between ethical systems. Democracies believe in freedom, dictatorships believe in hierarchies, things like that. And which is true as far as it goes. But on a deeper level, information flows differently in democracies and dictatorships. It's a different shape, a different kind of an information network. In a dictatorship, all decisions are made centrally. Dictatorships come from dictate. One person dictates everything. Putin dictates everything in Russia. Kim Jong-un dictates everything in North Korea. So all the information flows to a single hub where all the decisions are being made and sent back as orders. So it's a very centralized information network. A democracy, on the other hand, if you look at it in terms of you're in outer space looking at the flow of information in the United States, you will see several centers in the country. Washington, the political center, New York, the financial center, Los Angeles, there may be autistic center. But there is no single center that dictates everything. You have several centers. And you also have lots and lots of smaller hubs and centers where decisions are constantly being made. Private corporations, private businesses, voluntary associations, individuals making lots of decisions, constantly exchanging information without that information ever having to pass through the center, through Washington, or even through New York, or even through Los Angeles. So just looking, you don't know anything about the values of the people. You just imagine you're in outer space, in some spaceship or satellite, just observing the flow of information down below on the planet. You will see that North Korea is very different information flow than the United States. And this is crucial to understand. And when you look at thousands of years of history and how history changes and different regimes rise and fall, understanding what kind of information technology is available is a key to understanding which political systems or economic systems win. For most of history, a large-scale democracy like the United States was simply impossible. If you think about the ancient world, the only examples we know of democracy are small city-states like Republican Rome or like ancient Athens, or even smaller tribes. We don't have any example of a large-scale democracy, of millions of people spread over a vast territory that function democratically. Now, we know the stories, for instance, about the fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Caesars, of the emperors, of the autocrats. But it's really not the fault of Augustus Caesar or Nero or any of the other emperors that Rome became an autocratic empire. Simply, there was no way that the information technology necessary to maintain a large-scale democracy, which is bigger than just the city of Rome, like the whole of Italy, or the whole of the Mediterranean. Democracy is a conversation. And how can millions of people spread over thousands of kilometers converse and decide whether to go to war with the Persian Empire, what to do about the immigration crisis on the Danube with all these Germans trying to get in? You can't have a conversation because you don't have the information technology. And if it was just the fault of Caesar that Rome became an autocratic empire, we should have seen some other examples of a large-scale democracy in India, in China, somewhere, but nowhere. We only begin to see large-scale democracies in the late modern era, after the rise of new information technologies which were not available to the Romans, like the printed newspaper, and then the telegraph and the radio and television and so forth. Once you have these technologies, you begin to see large-scale democracies like the United States. And one final point, why is it so important to understand this? Once you understand that democracy is actually built on top of information technology, you also begin to understand the current crisis of democracy. Because, now all over the world, not just in the US, we have a crisis of democracy. And to a large extent, this is because there is a new information technology, social media, algorithms, AIs. And it's like, you're changing the basis of everything. So it's no wonder there is an earthquake in the structure that is built on top of it.
Mm-hmm. So we have this idea that the advent or the improvement of information systems and information technology is part and parcel of the empowerment of democratic systems across the world. But built into that is this sort of indelible misconstrual of information, this assumption or presumption that more information is better and leads to truth and knowledge and wisdom. And your book kind of puts the lie to that and tells a very different story around not only the definition of information, but its purpose.
Yeah, information isn't truth. Information is connection. It's something that holds a lot of people together. And unfortunately, what we see in history, that it's often much easier to connect people, to create social order with the help of fiction and fantasy and propaganda and lies than with the truth. So most information is not true. The truth is a very rare subset of the information in the world. The problem of truth is that the truth, first of all, is costly, whereas fiction is very cheap. If you want to write a truthful history book about the Roman Empire, for instance, you need to invest a lot of energy, time, money. You need to study Latin. You probably need to study Greek, ancient Greek. You need to do archaeological excavations and find these ancient, whether inscriptions or pottery or weapons, and analyze them. Very costly and difficult. To write a fictional story about the Roman Empire, very easy. You just write anything you want and it's there on the page or on the internet. The truth is often also very complicated because reality is complicated. You want to give a truthful explanation for why the Roman Republic fell or why the Roman Empire eventually fell. Very complicated. Whereas fiction can be made as easy, as simple as possible, and people tend to prefer simple explanations over complicated ones. And finally, the truth can be painful, unattractive. We often don't want to know the truth about ourselves, whether as individuals, which is why we go to therapy for many years to know the things we don't want to know about ourselves, and also on the level of entire nations. Each nation has its own dark episodes, its own skeletons or cemeteries in the closet that people don't want to know about. A politician that, in an election campaign would just tell people the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, is unlikely to win many votes. So in this competition between the truth, which is costly and complicated and sometimes painful, and fiction, which is cheap and simple and you can make it very attractive, fiction tends to win. And if you look at, the large-scale systems, networks in history, they are often built on fictions, not on the truth. Maybe I give one example. If you think about visual information, like portraits, paintings, photographs. So what is the most common portrait in the world? What is the most famous face in the history of humanity? It is the face of Jesus. I mean, there are more portraits of Jesus than of any other person in the history of the world. Billions and billions produced over centuries in cathedrals and churches and homes, and fully 100% of them are fictional. There is not a single authentic, truthful portrait of Jesus anywhere. We have no portrait of him from his own lifetime. The Bible doesn't say a single word about how he looked like. There is not a single word in the Bible, whether Jesus was tall or short, dark hair or blonde or bald, nothing. All the images, and it's one of the most famous faces in history, it all comes from the human imagination. And it's still very successful in inspiring people and uniting people. Could be for good purposes, charity and building hospitals and helping the poor, but could also be for bad purposes, crusades, persecutions, inquisitions. But either way, the immense power of a fictional image to unite people. And looking at what's happening today in the world, so you have these, big tech companies and social media companies that they tell us that more information is always good. So let's remove all restrictions on the flow of information and flood the world with more and more information. And more information would mean more truth, more knowledge, more wisdom. And this is simply not true. Most information is actually junk. If you just flood the world with information, the truth will sink to the bottom. It will not rise to the top, again, because it's costly and complicated. And you look around, we have this flood of information. We have the most sophisticated information technology in history, and people are losing the ability to hold a conversation, to talk and listen to one another. In the United States, Republicans and Democrats are barely able to talk to each other. And it's not an American phenomenon. You see the same thing in Brazil, in France, in the Philippines, all over the world. Because, again, the basic misconception is that more information is always good for us. It's like thinking that more food is always good for us.
I can't help but think that these machines, the veracity of the information that these machines provide us with is only as reliable as the data sets that it has been provided with. And right now, we're tiptoeing into a situation where the internet is being rapidly degraded because it's being populated more and more by AI content. Now, when you go to Google and you search, the first thing you see is sort of an AI kind of summary of your query as opposed to links. And this in turn is undermining the business model of legacy media and all forms of media, right? So as those continue to die on the vine, more and more of the internet will be a result of AI-generated content, and then it becomes a recursive thing in which it's feeding upon its own inputs to make decisions. And, with that, you can imagine a degradation of the data set upon which it is making those decisions.
Exactly. Even if you think about something like music. So AI that now creates music, it basically ate the whole of human music. Like for thousands of years, humans produced music or art or theater or whatever. Within a year, the current AIs just ate the whole of it and digested it and start now creating new music or new texts or new images. And the first kind of generation of AI texts or music, this is based on previous human culture. But with each passing year, the AIs will be eating their own products. Because as you know, the human share in music production or the human share in text production or image production will go lower and lower. Most images, most music will be produced, at least in part, by AI, and this will be the new food that the AI eats. And then you have exactly what you described, this recursive pattern, and where it will lead us, we have no idea. I mean, another way to think about it, this is the first time that we are basically about to enter a non-human culture. Like humans are our cultural entities. We live cocooned inside culture. Like all this music and art and also finance and also religion, this is all part of culture. And for tens of thousands of years, the only entities that produced culture were other humans. So all the songs you ever heard were produced by humans. All the religious mythologies you ever heard came from the human imagination. Now there is an alien intelligence, a non-human intelligence that will increasingly produce songs and music, mythology, financial strategies, political ideas. Even before we rush to decide, is it good, is it bad, just stop and think about the meaning of living in a non-human culture, or a culture which is, 40% or 70% non-human. It's not like going to China and seeing a different human culture. It's like really alien culture here on Earth. If you now live in the United States or in some other country, you are part of a system of hundreds of millions of people who trust each other in many ways which were really unimaginable in the Stone Age. Like, you don't know 99.99% of the other people in the country. And still, you trust them with so much. I mean, the food you eat, mostly you did not go to the forest to hunt and gather it by yourself. You rely on strangers to provide the food for you. Most of the tools you use are coming from strangers. Your security, you rely on police officers, on soldiers that you never met in your life. They are not your cousins, they are not your next door neighbors, and still they protect your life. And again, it's a good exercise every now and then to stop and think about how every day we are protected by all kinds of institutions. Like when people talk with me about the deep state, this conspiracy about the deep state, I immediately think about the sewage system. The sewage system is the deep state. It's a deep system of tunnels and pipes and pumps, which the state built under our houses and streets and neighborhoods, and saves our life every day because it keeps our sewage separate from our drinking water. You go to the toilet, you do your thing, it goes down into the deep state, which keeps it separate from the drinking water. If I can tell one historical anecdote, where did it come from? So, after the agricultural revolution, you have big cities. They are paradise for germs, hotbeds for epidemics. This continues really until the 19th century. London in the 19th century was the biggest city in the world and one of the most dirty and polluted and a hotbed for epidemics. And in the middle of the 19th century, there is a cholera epidemic and people in London are dying from cholera. And then you have this medical bureaucrat, Jon Snow, not the guy from Game of Thrones, a real Jon Snow, who did not fight dragons and zombies, but actually did save millions of lives. Because he went around London with lists and he interviewed all the people who got sick or who died. If somebody died from cholera, he would interview their family. Tell me, where did this person get their drinking water from? And he made these long lists of hundreds and thousands of people. And by analyzing these lists, he pinpointed a certain well on Broad Street in Soho in London, where almost everybody who got sick on cholera, they had a zip of water from that well at a certain stage. And he convinces the municipality to disable the pump of the well, and the epidemic stops. And then they investigate, they discover that the well was dug about a meter away from a cesspit, and sewage water from the cesspit got into the drinking water. And today, if you want to dig a well or a cesspit in London or in Los Angeles, you have to fill so many forms and to get all these bureaucratic permits, and it saves our lives.
And how does that relate to this idea of the deep state? I'm trying to tether those two notions together?
Again, the people who believe the conspiracy theories about the deep state, they say that all these state bureaucracies, they are elite conspiracies against the common people, trying to take over power, trying to destroy us. And in most cases, no, the people in these, to manage a sewage system, you need plumbers, you also need bureaucrats. Again, you need to apply for a license to dig a well. And it is managed by all these kind of state bureaucrats, and it's a very good thing because, again, there is corruption in these places sometimes. This is why we keep also courts. You can go to court. This is why we keep newspapers, so they can expose corruption in the cities, in the municipalities' sewage department. But most of the time, most of these people are honest people who are working very hard every day to keep our sewage separate from our drinking water and to keep us alive.
And by extrapolation, there are all of these bureaucracies that are working in our interest in invisible ways that we take for granted.
Exactly.
Basically, right.
Again, the AI, it's the most powerful technology ever created. It's not a tool, it's an agent. So you have millions and billions of new agents, very intelligent, very capable, that can be used to create the best healthcare system in the world, but also the most lethal army in the world, or the worst secret police in the world. If you think about authoritarian regimes, so throughout history, they always wanted to monitor their citizens around the clock. But this was technically impossible. Even in the Soviet Union, you have 200 million Soviet citizens. You can't follow them all the time because the KGB didn't have 200 million agents. And even if the KGB somehow got 200 million agents, that's not enough. Because, in the Soviet Union, it's still basically paper bureaucracy, the secret police. If a secret agent followed you around 24 hours a day, at the end of the day, they write a paper report about you and send it to KGB headquarters in Moscow. So imagine, every day, KGB headquarters is flooded with 200 million paper reports. Now, to be useful for anything, somebody needs to read and analyze them. They can't do it. They don't have the analysts. Therefore, even in the Soviet Union, some level of privacy was still the default for most people, for technical reasons. Now, for the first time in history, it is technically possible to annihilate privacy. A totalitarian regime today doesn't need millions of human agents if he wants to follow everybody around. You have the smartphones and cameras and drones and microphones everywhere. And you don't need millions of human analysts to analyze this ocean of information. You have AI. And this is already beginning to happen. This is not a future prediction. In many places around the world, you begin to see the formation of this totalitarian surveillance regime. It's happening in my country, in Israel. Israel is building this kind of surveillance regime in the occupied Palestinian territories to follow everybody around all the time. And also in our region, in Iran, since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, they had the hijab laws, which says that every woman, when she goes out, walking or even driving in her private car, she must wear the hijab, the headscarf. And until today, the regime had difficulty enforcing the hijab laws because they didn't have, millions of police officers that you can place on every street a police officer. If a woman drives without a headscarf, immediately she's arrested and fined or whatever. In the last few years, they switched to relying on an AI system. Iran is now crisscrossed by surveillance cameras with facial recognition software, which recognizes automatically if in the car that just passed by the camera, the facial recognition software can identify that this is a woman, not a man, and she's not wearing the hijab, and identify her identity, find her phone number, and within half a second, they send her an SMS message saying, you broke the hijab law, your car is impounded, your car is confiscated, stop the car and by the side of the road. This is daily occurrence today in Tehran and Isfahan and other parts of Iran. And this is based on AI. And it's not like there is a report that goes to the court and some human judge goes over the data and decides what to do. The AI, immediately decides, okay, the car is confiscated.
Thanks for listening to this installment of The Podcram. I hope it contains something useful for you. If you enjoy these selections and are curious about the curator's own thoughts, you can check out my other podcast, Psychic Lube, where I share concise concepts meant to grease the intellectual gears and help get your creative juices flowing. Each episode is an ongoing collaborative project that welcomes listeners to expand or rebut its points by email or comment, the most interesting of which get incorporated through periodic re-recordings. As always, if you're intrigued by today's content, I encourage you to go listen to the full podcast in its original form directly from its creators so that their sponsors keep paying them to make stuff for us and nobody feels compelled to sue me for copyright infringement. Now, get off your phone and go do smart stuff. Have a productive day.